Okay, good morning, boys and girls. Welcome to the Leisure World Photography Club meeting. I want to get things started just by going over. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen okay? Yeah, you're muted, I'm sorry. Okay, so anyway, just welcome to the meeting. We're going to go over real quickly what's coming up. March 10th, the board meeting, April 3rd is the end of season gathering. I've had a little bit of feedback on it, on the gathering, and I'll be putting something together for you soon on that. The monthly challenge, insects, is in progress, and there's where we are with gold stars. We have 5 members and 11 photographs on insects so far. Landscapes, Connie Larkey got a head start on it. She's already turned hers in, even though they're a March item. This week, there's no weekly challenge, and there's also no video lesson because we have a guest speaker. And then next week, the challenge will be orange purple flowers. And the week after that will be still waters. Some of you have already submitted, so that's good. And then the lessons for February 27th will be having fun. And then March 6th will be still life. And then we'll have a brief after the meeting fellowship. So, okay, that's that. And then I also wanted to real quickly thank our committee, April Taylor, Jane Page, Jeannie Fleur, Linda Humphrey, and Shelley Beagle. I'm sorry. These are the people that put together the scavenger hunt and the weekly challenge items for the 2021/2022 season. And I thank them for their hard work. And I'll be putting that in with next year's plans very soon. So without further ado, I'll shut up and turn this over to Colleen and let her get started. All yours, Colleen.
All right. Thank you, Bob. Thank you for having me, and thank you all for joining this meeting this morning. I'm very honored and thrilled to be here. I think this is my third time in 3 years, I think, that I've been presenting with you folks, but I'm very glad to hear that you guys are just, pandemic, like, you just keep going. You guys are meeting, you're doing scavenger hunts, you're doing all sorts of great things. So I'm very excited to hear that. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Colleen Minnick. I'm calling in from Chandler, Arizona, which is just across the way from you guys, just up the hill, actually. I am an ex-software engineer. So I spent 10 years working at Intel Corporation. I came here to Arizona out of college, and I never intended to be a full-time freelance photographer, but I started in 2001, and that is, I left my job in 2007. And so now I'm a full-time freelance photographer, writer, publisher, speaker, all sorts of crazy stuff. So no matter what I do, whether it's presentations like these, workshops, books, whatever it is, my whole purpose as a photographer is to help people get outside. Obviously, that's been a little bit of a challenge with the last year. So I am very grateful for the opportunity to talk with you guys in this form nonetheless. So we're going to talk about finding your creative voice. And when I first started, I just was a photographer who liked to take pretty pictures, and now I'm starting to evolve more into a more creative space. And so if you guys are struggling with creativity, you're struggling with who you are as a photographer, what do you want to be when you grow up, all those sorts of things, we're going to talk about finding your creative voice today. And let me share my screen here. And this is somewhat exciting. It's Ansel Adams' 119th birthday today, by the way. So if you guys have questions during the presentation, go ahead and drop them into the chat. I'm not going to be able to see the chat, but I just don't want to lose your questions. So we'll have a formal Q&A at the end. Bob, if you see something that's, super pressing as I go through my slides, definitely feel free to interrupt, okay?
Will do.
All right, thanks. So, like I said, I never intended to be a photographer. I ended up taking a black and white class, traditional development, at the local community college, Chandler Gilbert Community College down the road here. And it was an outlet to my very stressful corporate job. And when I walked into my first class, I didn't have a camera. Like, I didn't have a clue. I had no idea what I was doing, like none. And so when I picked up my first camera, I would go to places that would mean something to me, places that I was familiar with. And I would try to make a picture of what I saw, or at least what I thought I saw, things that were exciting or important to me. And I didn't know what an aperture was or a shutter speed was. I didn't even know what composition was. I just was pointing the camera and shooting. And part of the good thing about going around to these places that meant something to me is that I had a baseline. I knew what that scene should look like. It didn't always come out of my camera, but I knew, which was disappointing and frustrating, but I knew what I was seeing, and I was trying to get it out of this box. So this is one of my very first black and white photographs in that 2001 timeframe. And as I became more technically proficient, I started selling my work in 2003 at art shows around the Arizona. I got my first publication in 2006 with Arizona Highways magazine. And so it was getting technically better at things. I was going around to meaningful places, but I asked a mentor right as I started transitioning out of my job in 2007. I asked a mentor, what do I need to do to get published? Like, how do I make it as a photographer? How do I make it as a freelancer? And she said, well, what you need to do is go around the Southwest to all the icons and just photograph them differently. And I was like, okay, well, I could probably do that. Like, I would look at Arizona Highways magazine and I would look at what they did. And I'd be like, okay, let's see. I'd study it. I'd be like, Horseshoe Bend. It looks like everybody shoots Horseshoe Bend in the morning. So you know what I'll do? I'll shoot it at night. I'll shoot it with the Milky Way, or I'll shoot it as the sun goes down. Yeah, that's different. And so I would go around to all of these iconic locations, the Grand Canyon, Horseshoe Bend, saguaros, all of that. And I started getting really bored. And that's not a great thing to be after you've left your six-figure job, is bored. And I was essentially just making copies of what everybody else had already done. And I don't know that I was really all that excited about that. And I needed a creative jolt. I was selling my work. I mean, I was selling enough to actually, make it as a freelancer, but gosh, I just got really, really tired of that. And so, the saying is imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. And what me photographing all those iconic locations did is it gave me a baseline of what success looked like. The problem is that none of that work was mine. I actually didn't really like my work at that time. They were decent enough to sell, but I didn't like photography. I didn't like my photographs. Like, this is a bad place, right? So this is actually not the full quote by Oscar Wilde. It's imitation is the sincerest form of flattery that mediocrity can play to greatness. And I certainly did not want to be a mediocre photographer. I ended up trying to find a creative jolt. And just out of the blue, I learned about a program called the Artist in Residence program through the National Park Service. And at the very top of the list of about 25, 30 parks that offered this program was a place that I'd never heard of before back east. It was Acadia National Park. It was at the top of the list. It was an A. And I said, I'm going to look that up. So I looked it up. It looked like Oregon, and I loved photographing water. I wasn't so excited about photographing cactus, but I certainly was excited about photographing water. And so I decided to apply. And what happens is the park brings you on site for, a set period of time. It's in between a week, 4 weeks, depending on the park. They give you housing and you have free reign of the park. So long as you stay within the rules, you can do whatever you want for that amount of time. All you have to do is donate a print, a finished product, a finished piece of art to their archives at the end of the gig. So I applied. And when I had a conversation with Kate, I was accepted. She said, well, you can come in October. That's when the fall colors are. And I was like, oh, I can't do that. She goes, well, you can come in summer. That's when, we get a little fog. And I was like, oh, I can't do that. My schedule is just too busy. And she goes, well, the last thing I have available is November. And she goes, you're going to have the park to yourself, like there's going to be some fleeting light, like the weather is changing. It's a transition of season. There might be some leaves on the ground, but if you want to come then, it's not a popular time to come. But if you want to come then, you're more than welcome. And I said, sure. Like, I don't know, like, why not? And so where do I sign? So I went out to Acadia and I did exactly what I was doing in the Southwest, which is I was looking up magazines, calendars, postcards, and I was looking for all the iconic places that Acadia had, like Bass Harbor Head Lighthouse. It's one of the most beautiful places, beautiful scenes on the coast. And I would go and I would try to make it my own. I would wait for the tide to be at a different level. I would wait for the sun to be at a different level. I would wait for all of these external factors to come together before I would make an image of that cliche shot. So that was all fun. It was so fun that I wanted to go back. I had to see the place in fall color. I mean, because if it was this amazing in November, what was fall colors going to do for it, right? So those of you who've been out east, you guys know how just the whole landscape explodes into a kaleidoscope of color. And so I had never really seen anything like that. And so I reapplied for October of 2010. And the big difference between November and December was the number of people, obviously, on site. One of the things that I didn't get to do was work with students in Acadia. There's a program called the Schoodic Education Adventure Program. It's 4th through 8th graders. They learn about art and nature and science in Acadia. And I didn't have a chance to work with them in the first group because they weren't there. And so I came back in October specifically to work with the kids and actually ended up starting a photojournalism program. And I mention this not to brag, but because it plays into my story later down the road, later downstream. And so I didn't have a lot of time, but what I did is I went back to all those cliche locations and I tried to photograph them with fall color. And then I had a little bit of time just in between the classes that I was teaching to explore closer areas around me on the Schoodic Peninsula, which is a place that a lot of people don't get to see. And I found places that I would have never seen before, and I started photographing them to the best of my ability. Well, I loved Acadia so much, they couldn't get rid of me. By the time, let's see, I applied in winter of 2013. So I went back for my winter artisan residency. An Arizona girl was their first winter artisan residency. Yes, I didn't have a coat and was frozen to death. But I had gone back to Acadia for probably 150, 160 days in between my second residency and my third residency, teaching workshops, my own personal vacations. Like I absolutely was in love with this place, right? So when I made this photograph, and this is the definitive photograph that I made when everything for me changed. I was standing on the shoreline at Schoodic Peninsula and I was running around trying to look for a leading line. The sun was happening. We call this SPP, sheer panic photography, where you're running around going, I can't find it. I know there's a composition here somewhere, but I can't find it. I can't find it. The sun's coming up. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? And I stopped and I pulled my camera off of the tripod and I moved some dials and I snapped the picture and I looked at the back of the LCD and I said, yep, another sellable image. Yay. And so what had happened at that moment is that I had found the magic formula for making a great landscape photograph. And you're going to want to write this down. Start sarcasm, of course. For those of you who don't know me, I'm being sarcastic. But what I had found is that if you just stood in front of a beautiful, iconic scene, you shot pretty light, you shot at sunrise or sunset, especially if you had beautiful, fiery color in the sky, and you used, for at least me, a wide-angle lens with a 3-stop graduated neutral density filter set on ISO 100 and f/22, and you used foreground and you used background and everything from front to back was in focus. That's the near far technique. Then I would have a sellable photograph, a sellable landscape photograph. And the great news about this moment is that I had reached what's called the 10,000 hours, the deliberate hours. Anybody who've read Malcolm Gladwell and Outliers, he suggests that if you do something, if you practice something for 10,000 deliberate hours, it becomes second nature. So I had been in the habit of doing all of these things over and over and over again, you know, the going at sunrise, sunset, using my wide angle lens, setting the right, you know, f-stop, all of that for 10,000 hours. Like when I do the math, that's about right. So it took me about 12 years to get to a point where I was thinking about depth of field 1 minute and the next minute I wasn't. It became second nature. And so when we talk about finding your creative voice, one of the things that is really important is technical proficiency. If you're not there yet, if you're struggling, to understand your camera, keep going. Like it comes. If it comes for me, like I know it'll come for anybody. I'm just, slightly above the trained monkey. So if it happens for me, I know that anybody can do this. And so the downside of this moment, though, is that something had changed and I was absolutely bored out of my mind. Like when I made that image of the sunburst, I was like, I can't believe that I'm doing this. And the thought actually crossed my mind that I had just gone to Acadia too many times. Like, which is ludicrous, right? Like that I had photographed everything there was to this beautiful place, which is ludicrous. But I didn't have anything more to say about this place. And what I was saying was essentially what everybody else had said. And so being bored out of my mind was a problem. The other problem is that I had 3 weeks left of my residency. So I had to figure out what to do with these next 3 weeks. Like I was stuck in Acadia, like for me, right? So I went out to a place called Scudic Point and I had a little heart-to-heart talk with myself. I talked to myself a lot. I spent a lot of time by myself. So I said, okay, what's going on? What's happening here? You don't have anything to say. You're out of ideas. What do you want to do? Like, well, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to listen to the waves come in. And just out of the blue, my brain went back. It had a flashback back to my second artist in residency. And one of those classes, one of the very first classes that I taught for the photojournalism program, and it was a profound moment for me at the time, and it became even bigger when I was recalling it later. But in that second artist in residency, during that class, that photojournalism class, we handed fourth graders little disposable cameras. We taught them tic-tac-toe grid, rule of thirds. We sent them off on a trail. They could photograph whatever they wanted. And then they brought all their images back. We downloaded them on a computer. They picked one, they wrote a story, and then we created a little magazine for their class. It's a very fun little program for them. But I remember very distinctly this little boy, fourth grader, tearing down the trail ahead of the group, and he starts yelling. And it's like, okay, as the leader, as the guide, like, it's not great when kids start screaming, look at this mushroom, you guys, come here, look at this mushroom. And it was like, oh, okay, this is gonna be a great mushroom. And so I walk up to him. I was like, what's going on? He goes, oh my gosh, look at this mushroom. And he still has his camera in his back pocket and he looks up at me. In a moment, it still chokes me up today. I think I want to be a photographer just like you someday. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is why we teach, right? This melts my heart. But when I was recalling it in my third artist in residency, I had a very different perspective on it. I said, you know what? That fourth grader thinks that that's what I do as a photographer. He thinks that I run down trails yelling about mushrooms and how beautiful they are. And I do nothing of this sort. I get up at sunrise and sunset. I use my wide angle lens and I set it to ISO at f22, and I use a 3-stop graduated neutral density filter. That's what I do. I don't do anything that he thinks I do. And I thought, you know what? What if in these last 3 weeks of my residency, I became a fourth grader? What if I played like him? And what this really gets to is a concept that Zen Buddhism knows known as Shoshen. It's having a beginner's mind, an openness and enthusiasm as if you were experiencing everything for the first time. Do you remember how exciting things were when you saw things as a child? Like this fourth grader, this mushroom. That's a much more fun way to go through life than going, have I photographed everything there is? Like that's absurd, right? So I tried to embrace this idea of Shoshen. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert mind, there are few. And I had few ideas at the time, and I was looking for more ideas. I was looking for my voice. And so I decided to change the rules of the game instead of trying to follow rule of thirds and sunrise and sunset and, you know, all of that stuff that had become habitual for me, I set my ego aside and I gave myself permission to play. And I said that I wasn't going to photograph anything until I fell in love with it, until I lost my mind over a mushroom, or in my case, ice. The ice volcanoes, I called them, were just fascinating. And the ice volcanoes formed. I didn't know that, I know this is silly, but I'm from Arizona, so I don't have a lot of ice here. I didn't know that the ocean freezes at 25, 26 degrees saltwater. And what happens at high tide is this ice shelf forms in bays. And then as the tide lowers, and it lowers in Acadia 10 to 12 feet, it drops down onto the rocks and the boulders and it cracks and it makes these ice volcanoes. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen in my life. And so I made a photograph about it. And I didn't care if I was following the rules or whatever. I just photographed. As long as I lost my mind, it was fine. And I found that there was different kinds of ice. There were ice bubbles, there's frazzle and grease and pancake ice. Like, I had no idea there was that many kinds of ice. I just thought ice is what was on the road. Like when you're driving around in Chicago as I was growing up, like I didn't know there was all these kind of different types of ice. And then one of the most fun, one of the coolest thing happens, like literally the coolest, coldest, is Winter Storm Nemo blew through in 2013, right smack in the middle of my artisan residency. And everybody left the peninsula. I was by myself, and they were like, stock up on bread, peanut butter, and water, because this thing's going to be a beast. And it's going to hit at the high tide. It's going to hit the peak of the storm. It's going to hit right as the high tide. It's going to be terrifying. I was like, oh my God, I've never been in a blizzard. I'm from Arizona. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. So I woke up the next morning after it started. It started quite late in the evening. And then I woke up and I was like, wow, I have electricity. I have heat. Like, this is great. And I'm eating my oatmeal. I'm sitting there and I'm looking out the window. I've got a 4-foot snowdrift right out my door. And I was like, you know what? I need to be in the blizzard. Me sitting in this studio apartment, I'm not in the blizzard. I'm watching it. I'm not a part of this. Like, I want to know what it feels like to be outside in a blizzard, just like the Wabanaki Indians were. Like, they didn't have heat and electricity, they just took it. And so I got on every piece of clothing that I owned. I took one lens, I wrapped it in my rain gear, and I went out to Schoodic Point, and it was the most terrifying and awesome in rawness as I have ever seen in terms of weather. And I went out, and the wind, they clocked about 5 miles offshore from this point, they clocked 85-mile-an-hour winds. And so I could barely stand up in this thing. And so after a few times I got knocked down, and then one time I just got completely, just the wind sat me down on my butt. And I looked over at these trees, and I was like, how are these trees doing this? Like, they've been doing this for centuries, like, and they're growing. Like, I can't even stand up. Like, what are they doing? And I grabbed my camera and I made a picture of these trees. Now, these trees are not, this is not a remarkable photograph by any stretch of the imagination, but it was the first time that I created meaning. I created a story and then made the photograph, which was very different than anything I had done before. And so, as Paul Strand says, part of your finding your creative voice is this: above all, look at the things around you, the immediate world around you. If you are alive, it will mean something to you. And if you care enough about photography, and if you will know how to use it, you will want to photograph that meaning. So being technically competent, but also finding those things that are important to you. And those trees were important to me. They were an important part of my story as trying to figure out like being in a blizzard. And so I did this playing like a 4th grader and following my curiosity. I did this for about 3-4 days, and I was standing at West Pond Cove. I was trying to get excited about ice volcanoes once again, and I pulled away from my camera as I was shooting at sunset, and I said, you know, this would just be so much easier if I had pretty light. And I was like, wait, no, stop. You can't say that. Like, you can't say that aloud. Like, no, that's not it. Like, we don't make photographs just because of pretty light. We make photographs because they mean something to us. And I decided, I had a very profound revelation at that moment, that playing like a 4th grader was really hard. playing like a fourth grader is much harder than going around to iconic locations and just plopping your tripod down at pretty light. Like there's not a whole lot of mental exercise that goes into that, but playing like a fourth grader was exhausting. It was absolutely exhausting. But I decided that it was the most fun that I had had in a long time with photography, and that I was going to keep doing it for the rest of my time in my artist in residency. And so I, for the next 2 weeks, made the worst photographs of my life. These are small for a reason, and it's only a small sample of what I photographed. And so I basically just kept doing this. I just had to start my 10,000 deliberate hours all over again when it came to defining what my voice was and being able to convey that through the camera. And so while these were the worst photos of my life, some people may say they were complete failures. There was something very, very exciting about them. They were finally my pictures. They were not anybody else's pictures. They were mine. And so Cynthia Ocelli says, for a seed to achieve its greatest expression, it may come completely undone. The shell cracks, its insides come out, and everything changes. To someone who doesn't understand growth, it would look like complete destruction. And my tear sheets from that third artist in residency looked like complete destruction. But they were finally my photographs. And so when I went back home to Arizona, I had to redefine what my definition of a good photograph was. And before this artist in residency, I thought a good photograph was that I would feature a pretty scene. It was rule of thirds. It followed rule of thirds. It was properly exposed. It was in focus. It had great light. My mom liked it. If my mom liked it, I thought it'd be a good photograph. And then if somebody other than my mom bought a print of it, I thought, hey, I was doing pretty good. But after the residency, and I would encourage you to stop and think about what makes a good photograph to you. Everybody has a different definition of this, but this is mine, is that it shares an outward expression that matched what the photographer deemed meaningful enough to notice. What is important to you in your journey? And it hopefully presents something that people might miss if they're not paying attention or they're not looking deeper than those cliche or those iconic shots. And I tried to make it so that it's not easily reproduced by others, and that's by function of just connecting with what's in my brain, what's coming out, and having that individual connection. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but it shows the extraordinary in the ordinary, and this comes from within. It doesn't come from pretty light or beautiful places. Sure, that helps, and we do need to consider that, but the extraordinary comes from our definition of what's meaningful to us. I also had to ditch the notion of left brain and right brain. I had grown up without any visual art training. In fact, in 8th grade, I went into a drawing elective, and I was so bad at drawing the human head, the human face, that I actually left the elective. I took home economics instead and burned bread instead. So I had no artistic training. I was focused on academics. I was an athlete. I was always taught that I was a left brain person. I was analytical. I was thoughtful. I was methodical. And the right brain was reserved for those magic people, those super special people who just thought differently. And so I thought I was on the left, and where the creative magic happened was on the right. And that is not the case, I am here to say. So I had to undo that. I had to break that thought in my head, and I broke it when I started doing research on how to get a new idea. And what it comes out at too is, as James Webb Young, he wrote a great book I'll share with you later, an idea is nothing more or less than a new combination of old elements. And so I thought, well, I have a lot of old elements from Acadia specifically. I've got a lot of old elements in my brain in general. And so here's a really dumbed down version of how our brain works. We get a lot of this input every day, right? We learn things. We learn things like our camera. We learn photographic techniques. We learn about, the behavior of wildlife, behavior of light in a landscape. We have experiences. We travel. We have encounters with people. We follow our interests. We take up hobbies, for example, beyond photography. What happens with that information is our brain, think of the analytical side. It is not the left side. There's multiple parts of your brain involved across the entire brain, but your analytical parts of your brain puts all this information in basically file cabinets, basically. And it's so that when we need to recall it out of memory, we know our brains know where to go for it. Well, the creative part of our brains looks at that file cabinets and starts rubbing its hands together every time our prefrontal cortex goes to sleep. The prefrontal cortex is this front part of your brain. It is considered the filter of stupid ideas. It develops right around 4th and 5th grade, as it turns out, but it helps a lot of us from saying stupid things in social situations. Some of us have more developed filters than others. Artists are notorious for not having filters at all. And so what happens is when your prefrontal cortex goes to sleep, that creative parts of your brain go into the filing cabinets and essentially have a food fight. They start throwing ideas together, all of that information in your brain together in something that's called conceptual blending. Have any of you ever had a weird dream before? If you have ever had the experience of having a weird dream before and remembering it, you have experienced conceptual blending. Your prefrontal cortex goes to sleep when you go to sleep. And so what happens is your brain goes into that, all the things that you didn't even know you'd paid attention to, perhaps subconsciously or consciously, and it mixes all this stuff together. And so if we understand this idea of conceptual blending, that it happens naturally, every person, left or right brain, it happens to everyone. Then as artists, as photographers, what we want to try to do is literally dream while we're awake. And what this talks to is this idea of one should not only photograph things for what they are, but for what else they are. And so how do we get into a more metaphorical association with our photographs? How do we take the raw materials in our brain and we look at the world through our own individual lens and connect it with the landscape in our own way? Well, I would show you this image and I would challenge you, what else is it? Well, we all are probably going to have some different answers. What is it literally? It's reflections of a schooner mast in Frenchman Bay out in Maine. But what it looked like to me as a hiker who loves to study maps for hours on end, it looks like topography lines to me. And so I get excited about it because I'm like, oh, well, wow, that's topography lines in the water. How cool, I'm going to photograph that. And so I snap it. And so this is how we can connect our individuality with the landscape, is through conceptual blending, through literally dreaming while we're awake and asking ourselves metaphorically, what else is it? How many of you have ever gone out, probably when you're little, I'm sure you went out and you looked up at the clouds and you was like, oh my gosh, look, it's a dragon. If you've ever done that, you've experienced something called pareidolia, and that's our brain making order out of chaos. It's seeing patterns in randomness. I'm sorry to say that there were no dragons in the clouds, but our brain put that together based on what was already in our brain and what we think we saw. And so I don't know how many of you have watched The Queen's Gambit, but I just finished watching it the other day and I was so excited. They talked about apophenia. Unfortunately, they were talking about it in terms of psychosis, but apophenia is just using pareidolia and attaching meaning to it. So you might, for example, in a simplistic way, think the dragon is coming to visit you in some sort of fantastical world or something like that. So all of these things are interrelated: conceptual blending, metaphorical association, pareidolia. So if conceptual blending is sort of too overwhelming for you to think of, you just look at the world as if it's all clouds. It's a lot of fun, I got to be honest. So a lot of people think that conceptual blending happens just in the context of smaller scenes, but conceptual blending can happen in bigger scenes as well too. So this is the morning after Blizzard Storm Nemo. I decided to get in my car and see what was happening on the main part of the park on Mount Desert Island. And I don't even remember parking the car for this. Like, I remember seeing this scene. What had happened is the waves had crashed. They had frozen, with the high tide, they had frozen and blanketed the entire 150 yards or so of shoreline. It's something I'd never seen before. But when I looked at the scene, I didn't see ice. I saw jumping choya. And for those of you who have spent time in the desert, you guys know jumping cholla, right? It looks like jumping cholla. And about 3 hours, 4 hours later, this scene completely melted, and I've never seen anything like it again in Acadia. So it can happen with broader landscape scenes. You can make photographs for any reason you want. And so it's a lot of fun to go through life looking at things for what else they are. Now, to do this, we have to have a brain full of information. We have to have raw materials to work with to do this idea of conceptual blending. So Jack Foster, who also wrote a book, says that after all, if a new idea is nothing more or less than a new combination of elements, then it stands to reason that the person who knows more elements is more likely to come up with a new idea than a person who knows fewer old elements. So when we talk about finding our creative voice, it's not necessarily clicking the shutter button more. It's about filling your brain with knowledge and ideas. And one of the most ironic things that I found in my research after the 2013 struggle, the transition, is I came upon the Wallace model of creativity, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm an analytical person. I can follow a 4-step process to be creative. Like, the creative experts don't understand how the aha moment happens, which happens in the 3rd step, but they do know how to feed it. And it comes through preparation, incubation, illumination, inspiration, and verification. And how I see this for my work is filling our brains with knowledge and ideas. And that's where I spend 99% of my time as an artist. I do not snap the shutter. I don't even know if I've picked up a camera in 3 months, other than to photograph some cactus in my backyard now and then. But I'm filling my brain with ideas constantly. And I trust that this process works because it has and does, that eventually I'll make a great photograph. Eventually it'll all come together. My brain will do the work. It'll come together. And so incubation is taking those ideas, and you'll see maybe it's a painting, maybe it's another photographer's photograph, maybe it's an idea that you got in the middle of the grocery store, and I try to visualize my photograph. I try to put that together and see how it would help my work. Like, what could I do with that? Where would I photograph that? Would I go to Maine? Would I go to Oregon? Would I do it in the desert? How would I use this? And then I stop thinking. That's one of the most important things about creating the aha moment, is to stop thinking. And so the illumination inspiration stage is when we actually make the images, and then polishing and critiquing your work gives you new ideas. It's filling your brain with knowledge and ideas. So there's a lot going on in terms of the creative process. And as Jay Maysel said when he was interviewed about how to become a better photographer, it wasn't to go buy another lens, it wasn't to use a polarizer, it was to become a more interesting person. And I'm going to assume that we are all interesting, but how we can sort of expand this as we look ahead to our photography is to follow your own curiosities. Find your own mushroom. Like, it's okay that maybe you like mushrooms. I love bubbles, and I couldn't care less what people think of me photographing bubbles, because it makes my life better. It makes it more fun. And so I don't really have this line between photography and life. It's not like photography is not like a thing I do in my free time. Photography and life just kind of go together. And so I'm going to talk about how we can cross train our brain, learning from new experiences. I'm going to talk about stealing like an artist. How do we build this pool of raw materials in our brain to facilitate that conceptual blending? Because that conceptual blending is where we get our creative voice from. So cross training your brain is simply thinking about, what do you do outside of photography? So we were talking about earlier, I just took up watercolor painting, and not because I'm good at it, not because I want to be good at it, not because I want to be Picasso or anything about it. It's just because it sounded like it was fun. And I had actually met Jean Adams, who is Ansel Adams' daughter-in-law. I actually went camping with her 2-3 weeks ago. She just got a new camper van, and she was watercolor painting. And she said, you know what, you should try it. And I said, Jean, you know what, I should. And I went home and I bought a cheap little plastic kit, and I tried it. And it was fun. It was interesting. And as someone mentioned earlier, what if you find a new passion out of this? What if you find a new talent out of doing something new? Like, how great would that be to learn after all of these years of hiding and checking boxes? Like, why not try these things? And then ask yourself, what new things can you get out of it to influence your photographic work? So a couple more examples of this to inspire you, hopefully, is I take adult ballet classes. I just took up pointe about a year and a half ago. Pointe is something that I wanted to do as a child, never had time for, but I thought, why not? And what happens is when I'm in my ballet classes, is I learn movement, I learn different technique, and when I go out into the field, when I go out to places like Acadia, I start to see dancing. I start to see movement in water and in ice. So this is a PK. I call this icicle is doing a beautiful PK. And a PK is just a prick of the foot. And it's a very quick movement. It's very precise. And so, obviously the ice isn't doing a PK. And if you don't know anything about ballet, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about, but that's okay. Like, I made the photograph because it reminded me of all of the great times that I was having in my ballet class. I also love stand-up paddleboarding. It's one of my favorite things to do. And stand-up paddleboarding is basically a sort of a long surfboard. And I cross flat water. I do some white water as well. This photograph I made when I crossed Lake Mead. I did about 61 miles over 9 days. And this is 12 miles from anywhere. And so what stand-up paddleboarding does is it gets me to places that I wouldn't normally see. And it's, to be honest, this is not a place that most humans are going to see unless they have a boat or they have a paddleboard. And so by doing something else, the camera comes with me to help tell my story as I do these adventures. This adventure is just something I do anyway, not for photographic reasons. So I don't really go out on photo shoots anymore. I don't get up at sunrise and sunset. I just make photographs when it moves me, when I get excited about it, just like that young photographer. And sometimes creativity doesn't fit in the box that the camera manufacturers have given to us. Sometimes we want to express ourselves differently. And so I don't constrain myself to just photographic expression. I actually love to write as well. And so if you guys are still awake, I'm going to read you a poem. And this is to share that I'm not a poet laureate, but I'm still having fun. And it's the reason why I made a photograph. And one of the things that I love to do in expressing my creative voice is I try to put myself in a different perspective. I try to think, what would it be like to be a wave? What would it like to be a tree? What would it be like? How are they seeing the world? What about a rock? Like, what does a rock see over the course of its lifetime? And so one of the things that I do is I write poetry about it, and then I make a photograph. Sometimes I make the photograph and write the poem about it. Doesn't matter. It's all creative. So here is my poem about On Becoming a Wave. Wander effortlessly across the palette of blue, bobbing, boiling, rolling, until the winds guide you home. Twist your tendrils and fluff your skirt to sashay into your daring white-gloved entrance. Rumble, rock, foam and froth with unbridled delight. Rain or shine, no matter the terrain, disregard resistance. Thunder madly into resilient cliffs, explode into a bouquet of decay. Spray seaweed confetti across the sky. Ooze through every crack, every crevice, taunting each grain of sand to roll between your insistent caress. Frolic until a drifter's whisper summons your soul. Disregard resistance. Pause to remember where you came from, then as the cobble claps, take a bow and recede elegantly, flawlessly, as delicate as lace. Time to begin again. So, sometimes I just got to get it out and then I go make a photograph of it. On this case, I actually stood on the shore and I ran with my camera. I physically was running with my camera and I was following the wave as it was rolling onto Cannon Beach. So as Anton Chekhov says, if you want to work on your art, work on your life. Like, that's the way to find your creative voice, is to work on your life. The other way is to steal like an artist. Not from an artist, like an artist. And what this means is that this is a book by Austin Kleon. It's a great read. If you haven't read it yet, I highly recommend it. And he, like many of the other creative experts, believe that nothing comes from nothing. Like, it comes from some sort of inspiration, and that it combines with existing knowledge, that conceptual blending concept. And so what he recommends is collecting ideas that inspire you from everywhere and anywhere. It doesn't have to be a photograph. It could be a movie. It could be a a painting, it could be a poem, it could be a song lyric, it could be anything. And reverse engineering, how did they come to that? And so how this came to play for me in the context of Acadia is I met Jack Dykinga. Some of you might know Jack. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning photographer, but he's also a very renowned Southwest landscape photographer, very, very good at what he does. I had the chance to present at the Sedona Photo Symposium with him a number of years ago, right before I went out to Acadia on my first artist in residency. And he displayed this photograph from Acadia in his presentation. And I ran up to Jack right after and was like, oh my God, Jack, I love that picture of the lily pads at Acadia. Like, oh my God, I love that picture. Could you tell me where that was in Acadia? I'm going to Acadia. Could you tell me? And he goes, oh yeah, sure. No, it's at the Tarn. Like you'll go to the Tarn, you'll find it. I'm like, oh my God, okay. So what do you think I did when I went to Acadia for the first time? Well, I went to the Tarn, shockingly enough, because I was going to make a picture just like Jack's, right? And so I stood on the side of the Tarn with my 100 to 400 millimeter lens. I was going to be Jack Dykinga in Acadia. And I started photographing and I'm going, oh gosh, no, that's really bad. Like, nope, that's really bad too. Oh, nope, I don't like that. Oh no. So I did, I had the heart to heart with myself. I had the self-talk again. I said, Colleen, what's going on here? Like, this is definitely not Jack Dykinga. And I said, I responded to myself. I said, you know what? I don't really like lily pads. I don't know anything about lily pads. I don't know why they're here. I don't have anything to say about lily pads other than they exist at the Tarn. And if you look at this image, that's exactly about as good as that image is going to get. There are lily pads at the Tarn. But I was like, I love Jack's image. Like, I don't know. But I'm just not going to photograph. I'm just not going to photograph lily pads anymore. I can't do this. I'm not doing it. So I don't know, maybe a year or two went by and do you guys have the wine and paint thing down like around you guys where you like bring the wine in and they teach you how to paint something? Well, my mom, I was looking for something to do at home and I said, Ma, there's this wine and paint thing that just came in down the street. Do you want to go try it? She goes, yeah, sure. I got Thursday open. I go, awesome. I'm going to go look up what they're going to paint on Thursday. And would you believe that they were going to paint Monet lily pads? So let's have a new experience. If I can't be one with the lily pads out in the field, maybe I can paint them. And I could not paint them. And so this was my final rendition of Monet's lily pads. And for those of you who are going, hey, that's not too bad, you're being very, very kind. This is the original. This is what Monet painted. I would like to believe that I had probably a little bit more energy than Monet. I don't know. It's reflective in my work. I had never painted before. So this was my first try. But what happened when I painted, this was acrylics, is I understood layering for the first time in a completely different way. Like I didn't understand depth at that time. Like it was just like in a photograph, I didn't understand depth. Like I understood depth of field, but I didn't understand that we were working with a two-dimensional media. And now I had to paint, and this is how I overlaid light. And this is how a highlight and a shadow working together. Like I had no idea. So had I never painted, had I never done this wine and paint thing, like I would have never been able to come to that. Well, I wouldn't say never. It would have taken me a long time to get to that point in my photography. So as Vincent Van Gogh says, if you hear a voice within you say you cannot paint, then by all means paint, and that voice will be silenced. So I went back to Acadia and I became one with the lily pads and I made this image, which I was pleased with. But I went back to Jack's image. I was like, gosh, I would hang that image on the wall. Like it can't possibly be the lily pads. Like there's got to be something else going on. And when I went back and I stole like an artist, I decided that I actually loved the reflected light in his photograph. It wasn't necessarily the lily pads, it was the striking light. And so I went back to the Tarn looking for reflected light, and this is what I came up with on my own. And you know what, there are some lily pads down here, for good time's sake. And I put some lily pads in, but this is my image. It doesn't look anything like Jack, and that's okay. This is stealing like an artist. I don't want to make the same photograph that Jack does. I want to express myself in new and different ways. After all, where is it? Albert Einstein says creativity is knowing how to hide your sources. So I eventually, after all of this in Acadia, I had to come back to the desert. And I made a pretty shocking discovery after living in the desert for, 14, 15 years. I thought it was a beautiful, beautiful place, but it was not anything that excited me to photograph. Cactus were not my mushroom, water was. And so I put myself into positions where I could photograph water more on more frequent occasions in the desert, places like the Grand Canyon, places like Lake Powell, Lake Mead, things like that. And what I found with this technique, with by conceptual blending and following the creative process and all the things that I've already talked about, is that creativity came with me everywhere I went, even in my backyard. Like, I didn't have to travel to Acadia. I didn't have to go to these places, these beautiful places. Creativity was everywhere. And it didn't just turn on at sunrise or sunset, it happened all day long. And so this is midday in my backyard. And so as I was making these photographs that were finally mine, I fear crept in. Like, it was like everybody wants to be accepted. Everybody wants everybody to love their images, right? Like, was like, am I being too weird? Like, is anybody gonna get this? Like, what if I post my picture on Facebook and nobody likes it? Like, this is gonna be tragic, right? Well, I'm here to ask, who cares? Like, you're the one who has to live with these photographs on your hard drive. Like, think about what happens in social media, right? Like, you post your photograph and like people like click the like, and then what happens? Like, they just go on to the cute dog trick videos, right? Like, they've moved on with their life. Like, maybe they'll buy a print, maybe you'll watch a presentation like this, but ultimately, like, I have to live with these images. So why would I not be excited about what I create? And maybe when I present them, I hope that you like them. I hope that they inspire you to go to Acadia and to do great things with your own work. But if you don't like it, like, that's fine. You don't have to like it. I'm still going to create what I want to create. It's my voice. I can say what I want to say about the world that I experience. And that's them. I think one of the things when it comes to fear of acceptance and fear of all this, performing and being liked and all this stuff, is that remember that you are the only person on this planet and Mars who can see the world the way that you do. Like, you're the only one. Like, and so if we don't see what comes out of your brain, like, we're never going to see it. And so for me, that's how I can gain more confidence in saying, you know what, nobody else can say this because I'm using the raw materials in my brain and I'm connecting it in a new and different way. Nobody else is going to put it together that way, not exactly the same way. And so when I'm out in the field, I don't have any pressure to make a photograph. I just want to make sure that I'm having fun, I'm filling my brain, and I'm learning something new. And if the photograph happens, awesome. And if it doesn't, awesome. If it's weird, even better. So when you're looking for your own voice, or you're looking to express your own voice, find your own meaning. And that goes back to my very first photograph when that was in that black and white class, is going to the places that mean something to me and picking out the moments that mean something to me. The natural world isn't a good scene or a bad scene. That's what we apply that judgment on top of it. The natural world just exists. So if you love it, photograph it. If you don't love it, don't photograph it. Be that fourth grader. Be looking for your mushrooms, or in my case, my bubbles. So make an image for any reason you want to, and if it has value to you, that's reason enough to make it. So, as Anais Nin says, there's no one big cosmic meaning for all. There's only the meaning we each give to our life, an individual meaning, an individual plot, like an individual novel, a book for each person. And may I add, a photograph as well. So for me, what this came down to is going through the artist in residence program, going to Maine, changing my latitude. It changed my attitude completely about photography. And so what happened is my relationship with Mother Nature changed. The reason for making a photograph changed. I was based more on internal factors and trying to figure out, okay, I've got this external scene, I've got these visual elements, I've got this kind of light, I got this moment. This moment is happening now and it is never going to be repeated. What can I do with it? And sometimes I do something with it and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just stand there and appreciate the beauty of the world, and that alone is enough. I put it in my own brain's memory card, and it feeds that creative process. What happened is that I actually photograph way less now. which is fine. I'm filling my brain constantly though with ideas and thoughts and ways that I can grow my creative voice. So the way to improve your voice is, as it turns out, to not go back to iconic places and do things differently. It's to change yourself. It's to grow yourself. And so I have, in conclusion, somewhat misled you. It is not about finding your voice. It's about listening to your own voice. You already have a voice. It's just paying attention to it, and more importantly, being confident that it's worth expressing in a visual form. So my tips and tricks for finding your creative voice or listening to your creative voice is reignite that fourth grader in you. It's so much more fun than going through life than toting around your wide angle lens and your filters and all that business. Go out and find your mushrooms. Go out and find what blows your mind, and embrace that in journey, and be excited about it. That it's feeding your creative process, even if you don't produce something in the field. And so make a lot of bad images and be okay with it. Just learn from every single one of them. Try new things. If you're not failing, you're probably not pushing it hard enough. So be fearless, be weird, and define your own meaning. Or, as Oscar Wilde says, be yourself. Everyone else is already taken. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Here are some additional resources that really, really helped me through this transition from being a person who liked to take pretty pictures to an artist who had a unique voice, and excitement and enthusiasm for the natural world. There's a lot of different books out there. I do have, I write a Dear Bubbles column. Bubbles is my nickname, and Dear Bubbles is an advice column for photography and the creative life. And I have two columns in particular that would be helpful if you want a refresher on some of the things that I've talked about. It Takes Two talks about conceptual blending, and then Keeping It Fresh talks about flow, which I haven't covered here, but it talks about how to get into a flow state, how to get unstuck, how to get re-inspired, and more about that Wallace model of creativity that I talked about earlier in the presentation. So thank you so very much for listening. I hope that you've gotten some new ideas and at least some inspiration to find your own creative voice and express yourself visually as you go back out into the world as our pandemic starts to come to an end. If anybody is still awake, I will take some questions.
We're definitely awake, Colleen. That was wonderful. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Anybody have any questions?
Can I just say something? It's a story, Colleen, because you mentioned Mars. My nephew absolutely loves flying. So he sent me a text note saying, the best thing American does is flying to Mars. It's exceptional. So I wrote back and said, yep, cost 6.2 billion. And it took 6.5 months. When are you going? He said, don't have enough frequent flyer miles yet. So,
well, keep at it. Like they add up.
He would go in a shot if he could. Yeah. So, like you say, that's his imagination. He loves that stuff.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, hopefully he can cultivate that as he
does. And he takes photography of that. And he has a friend who works at one of the big museums in England. The name escapes me right now. And he lets his friend use his work. I wish he would take more credit for it, but he doesn't at the moment.
Very good. Very good. All right.
Anyone else?
Let me jump into the chat here, Bob. Let's see. Linda has a question. What type of camera would you recommend for my grandchildren, Jack 6th grader and Emily 3rd grader? Oh boy. Right now, I mean, I'm shooting with a mirrorless camera, and mirrorless are lighter and smaller than the big bulky DSLRs. So I would probably recommend sort of an entry-level mirrorless if you could find that. All of the brands have spectacular cameras right now, so they all do way more than they need, than we need them to do, except for make us coffee in the morning. So they're all, from a technological perspective, Fuji, Canon, Nikon. I shoot with an Olympus OMD EM1 Mark II. So they're all really fantastic. So I would look for maybe a used or an entry level mirrorless camera, something smaller that they can just go around. They don't have to lug a bunch of gear around just to see if they like it and give it a try. So,
Just to go along, Colleen, with your perception of fresh, I think it's always fun to travel with a person that hasn't been there before.
mhm.
And then you get the experience of fresh eyes again. And as I told you in a note, I worked for 7 years in Maine as a camp counselor. And so Bar Harbor, Portland,
Yeah.
Arcadia, up to Nova Scotia and back, we're home base. So thank you very much for sharing. But fresh eyes, I love your concept.
Yeah, fresh eyes. Any way that you can get it, whether you pretend like you're a kid again, whether bringing somebody with you who has never seen it before is fascinating. That because there are so many little things that we see all the time and we take for granted. I'll give you an example. I had a friend come in from Kentucky last year. He had never, ever been to Arizona. We were on our way to the Grand Canyon. And we're driving over this hill, and I've driven from Phoenix to the Grand Canyon or Flagstaff. I don't even know how many times, right? Like it's just, you get in the car, you go on autopilot, you hit cruise control, and you go up the hill, right? And we come up over this hill in Black Canyon, and he sees the Bradshaw Mountains, and he stops me from talking, and he goes, "Are you telling me that the Grand Canyon is more beautiful than this?" And I was like, it's the Bradshaw Mountains. Like, I've seen this 4 million times. And to him, he was like, this is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Like, he'd never seen anything like it. And so we ended up at the Grand Canyon, and he was absolutely speechless. But at that moment, like things that I just keep driving by, it's just a mountain, right? Like whatever. He was like, "Are you saying the Grand Canyon is more beautiful than this?" It was I call it Andy's Point now.
That's good.
To put the exclamation point behind your story. Yep.
So where are you going now to get the new experiences? You've been Maine, you've been to the Oregon coast here.
Yes.
What are you
Yeah,
curious about
so
now?
right now, I can have a new experience in Acadia and Oregon and those places just by nature of attitude and perspective. Obviously, those are not accessible at the moment. I've been focusing my work much more in the last 3 to 5 years on the Colorado River, and that is actually becoming sort of my second home, very much like Acadia was. So in a week, I will be at this place right here. This place right here, this is the confluence of the Colorado River coming this way and the Green River here. This is where I stopped. I went last October. This is where I stopped. I was on my stand-up paddleboard, and the trip down the Colorado River was flat water, but everything below this is whitewater. It's a place called Cataract Canyon, and I'm gonna see that for the first time in a week with a good friend of mine, good expert rowers, because I am not quite there yet. But most of my work now is on the Colorado River. I have an exhibition coming up that Gene Adams is curating. It's called The Current Flow, where I want to sort of raise awareness of the beauty of the Colorado River and some of the issues that we're working with to make sure that everybody has water to drink, and agriculture gets their share of water, and everybody is happy with the water. I'm actually writing a memoir as well called Going with the Flow about my relationship with the Colorado. I know I have a lot of free time. I'm actually terrified of water where I can't see my feet. And in 2015, my life sort of took a really major left-hand turn, and I ended up falling in love with the Colorado River. So it's sort of a story about how life sort of fell apart and then came back together again. So almost all of my work right now is especially in the pandemic where I don't have the ability to go farther out, is Colorado River.
One reason I was asking is, I don't know if you've ever been to the Minnesota boundary waters.
Oh,
but
I have friends who keep telling me I gotta go.
I find portages between lakes a great place to be surprised.
I bet. I bet. I
And
would,
each lake has its own story.
yeah, I can imagine. I hear it's a marvelous place.
I'd like to challenge you to get in a boat with oars and take a picture of the phosphorescence on the oars when you're rowing, and watch the fish fly away from you as you're going in the salt water. It's the most beautiful, mystical thing you've ever seen.
I bet.
And you liking water, you'd love it.
Oceans, I'm warming up to. There's sharks, so like I'm I'm a
Go
little
in-
bit, but that, yeah,
Oh, in
the
Puget Sound, it's beautiful.
bioluminescence and all of that, like that just sounds like pure magic to me. Yeah.
It's hard. I haven't ever done it, but I'm gonna.
Do it. Do it. Do it.
On his bucket list.
Colleen,
Yes,
a real experience for you to tackle is go scuba diving, get Patty certified, and do the Great Barrier Reef in Australia.
I gotta get over my irrational fear a little bit more. But I actually, the thought did cross my mind that one of the best ways to do that would to go scuba in water where, like clear water, like Caribbean water first, and then maybe I'll get there. See, the thing with stand-up paddleboarding, see, this is important, is that I'm not in the water. I stand up on the water. Like if I can't see it, it doesn't exist. So like being in the water, I'm still working on it. But yes, to see underwater, I mean, see a world that most people don't see, that would just be, yeah. I'll try. I'll try it before bungee jumping and skydiving. How about that?
Anything else, guys? Any other
You can
questions?
Thanks so much. It was great.
Linda had a couple of questions.
Sure, go ahead.
Colleen, okay, you can take the yellow submarine off the big island there, Kona, and you can take the yellow submarine in Maui. It goes down 60 feet.
Oh, sure. I've heard of that. Yeah. Haven't done that yet, but yeah, that'd be fun.
Then you have to get over your fear of closed places.
Another one there. And we actually shot this doors off helicopter flight over the erupting volcano.
Oh, that's totally my camp. Like I could do that.
It was easy. It was
That'd be fun.
easy. I am not that adventurous. You're shooting out the open door at 300 miles an hour. That's the only hard part.
Oh yeah.
Get some just mind-blowing things that way.
Oh yeah. I'd sign me up for that. I've photographed out planes before, so
Okay, well,
yeah, helicopter. I'm spewing volcanoes, magma. Sure, it's not water. It's good.
They strap you in and it feels very safe.
it does feel very safe.
Yeah, sign me up. Let's go.
Until the
Colleen,
helicopter
My
falls.
favorite places, Colleen, is Outer Hebrides. If you go up at the
Oh,
north
yeah.
end of the Lewis Island, which is way up there in the Atlantic, if you get on the coast there, the beaches and the waves there are amazing. And you can just sit there. I sat there for age, just shooting pictures at it. I need to be a
Yeah.
little more constructive about the type of things I'm doing, but I just love the ocean and the waves up there.
If you're having fun, it counts. I've been to northern Scotland, like that area, and I've marked the Hebrides on my and a couple of other islands around Scotland as well. That would just be magnificent
Yeah.
to get back to travel.
That- yeah, that's my next one in June. I'm hoping to make the Orkney Isles up that way.
Oh yeah, the Orkneys too. Yeah.
Love the ocean.
I'll offer
Just
you a
The
free.
highlands, driving across the highlands and the different kinds of water that you see.
Mm-hmm. I think Linda has something to say. Linda, take it away.
I will offer you a free timeshare in the Big Island
Oh, sweet.
and Maui and Kauai too for a week each.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Right,
We can play. We could have some fun there.
right. Right.
Yeah, it looks like you've got your email. Let me copy your email down and let's chat. That would be amazing.
And New Zealand, so you can go down to the South Island and do your bungee jumping in Queensland. That started, Colleen.
We could do, if we're going to do New Zealand, I might as well go scuba at the Great Barrier Reef right next door, right? I mean, if you're in that neck of the woods, right? I
not
might
right
as
next
well
door.
get it all done.
It's just
Right.
local.
Why not? Yeah. All right. That's so kind of you. Thank you, Linda. You had a couple of other questions. You had to use a light meter. I used my meter in my camera. I use spot meter, but that's only I pay attention to my histogram. It doesn't matter what meter you have. Let me see if I have a Dear Bubbles about this. Hang on. Yeah, it's in the context of photographing snow, but it'll give you an idea of how I do my metering. I don't pay attention to metering much in digital photography these days. The histogram tells me what I need to know. I know how to adjust for it, plus or minus, like it's done. The reason I use spot metering is from the days of this guy over here, my 4x5, where it didn't have a built-in spot meter, and I had to go around with an external spot meter and measure tones and do calculations and all sorts of crazy stuff. That was especially important when I was using my graduated neutral density filters. Getting the tonal range between the sky and the foreground and making sure that I understood what strength I needed to make sure that my exposure came out okay. 2 weeks later, I'd find out the answer, but with digital, it's an instant feedback with the histogram. So I use the in-camera meter, but you can use it on spot meter or evaluative, whatever one you set, center weighted, whatever you want. It doesn't matter. As long as you're paying attention to the histogram, for landscape photography, it doesn't really matter. You've also asked, do I have a unique camera for water? I do not. I just use my mirrorless. I have a bunch of dry bags. So, a dry bag is water resistant. So if it falls in the water, and I have fallen in, the bag falls in and my camera is protected. And so I do stand up on my paddleboard with my camera quite frequently. It's my way of not falling off. Into the water with sharks. So stay on my board. And then the last one is, what do you do for a black lab or black seal in snow? Oh, actually, you know what? That Dear Bubbles, that getting it white will help with this question. Because I talk about the zone system and as it relates to spot metering and whatnot. Yeah, you're just going to have, if you've got a black seal or a black dog in snow, you have to balance your exposure for the highlight and the dark. It's much worse for you to blow out the highlights. So I would expose for the snow, and that will make things a little bit darker. It will underexpose perhaps a little bit, and that'll make your dog or your seal a little bit darker. But you can recover the blacks, you can recover those dark tones. You can't recover blown out highlights in digital. So maybe a touch of underexposure just to be safe. I would expose for the snow. I would be paying attention to the snow first. Yeah. And then whatever the seal or the dog or whatever bear who's not hibernating in winter comes out. That way, yeah, I would pay attention more to the snow.
They actually do come out occasionally.
They do. They actually don't sleep. Anyway. Yeah.
Especially
They
if
don't actually
they're
hibernate.
female and have cubs.
Exactly. Yeah.
Do you bracket?
Oh my gosh, that's going to be the next Dear Bubbles question next week. Good job. It's one that comes up frequently. I do not bracket. Bracketing is taking multiple exposures at different exposure levels. So, maybe it would be +1, -1, or half stop on either side of your zero, your correct exposure, whatever that may be. I used to bracket with the film cameras in film days all the time because it you know, for me to travel 2,000 miles and realize that I didn't get it right in my film, problematic. With digital, we've got instant feedback. So I look at my histogram, I take a shot, I look at my histogram and I say either got the right exposure or I didn't. And then I add light or I subtract light. And then I move on. The thing with bracketing is that if you're just blindly bracketing, you're going to have a lot of images to sort through. And by the time I wrote another Dear Bubbles about keeping it in the field, I know what photograph I'm keeping when I make it. I don't go back into my computer and like sort through my images and pick the ones that I want. I already know that because my composition's done, my lighting's done, my meaning is there, my message is there, everything I've already built into it. I use processing to just polish my vision up. Maybe it changes a little bit. But for me to sort through all of this bracketing stuff, this junk would just be, it would make processing even more tedious for me. Now, the one time that I do bracket is if I'm intentionally going for high dynamic range imaging. And that's where I know that my scene does not, my camera will not be able to take in the full dynamic range of the scene. And what dynamic range means is that there's just too many darks and too many lights, and they're too far apart in terms of tonality range. And so if I know that, and I don't have a filter, graduated neutral density filter to help me, for example, then I will take multiple images at +1, -1, or +2, -2, something like that, whatever it is, based on the scene. Then I will bracket with the intention of using those brackets. So I will blend images later in processing, whether I'll blend 2 of them together, 3 of them together, whatever, 5, whatever it is. But if I bracket, it is for a purpose. It is for a reason. I'm just not spraying and praying, as we'd call it. I'm just not doing it just because I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm doing it for a reason, to solve a problem, which is exposure, technological issues with my camera. So it's a great question. So look for Dear Bubbles, not this Wednesday, next Wednesday. I do it on the first Wednesdays now of each month. I wrote it for a year. I wrote 52 columns during the pandemic, which was super fun. But with travel and everything going on.
Chat is saved.
Okay.
Have you followed the work of Jim Brandenburg at all?
Yeah, actually, one of my friends who lives up in Duluth, Minnesota, actually works a fair bit with him. I don't know him personally, but I do know of him. Yeah, it's really great.
The reason I asked is that he did the challenge of 1 photo a day. I think it was for 365 days.
Mhm.
He could only take 1 photo a day.
Yeah, it's a great way to boost your creativity, just to constrain yourself to 1 photograph. I mean, that's essentially how many photographs I was making with this guy because it took so long, right? So yeah, no, that's great. It's a great way to get your creative juices going.
Any other questions?
All right, well, if you do have more questions, I had my contact information up there. Certainly send me a note. I'd love to hear from you. Keep in touch through social media. I'd love to see what you're up to. But yeah, if you have any questions, send it to me, like do I bracket? Should I be bracketing? Questions like that end up on Dear Bubbles, and they help a much broader community learn photography. So
right.
Definitely appreciate those questions. So
Well, thanks very much,
you guys are all
Colleen.
well.
Thanks very much, Colleen. I'm going to go ahead and leave it open for a few minutes for those that want to hang around for the after the show. And Colleen, thank you so much for being our guest.
Thank
We
you. Appreciate it.
Thank you,
Take care.
Colin. Thank you.
Thank
Lovely
you,
to see
Colleen.
You bet. Thank you. Do I get to stay or do I have to leave?
Yes, please stay.
What I heard after show party. I don't know.
Yeah, this
What's
is
going
just
on?
fun.
Just
We're just gonna have fun.
It could be anything.
Nothing technical, all fun.
It's our get together in this pandemic.
Diane,
Oh, all right.
I'm turning the meeting over to Diane and I'll bow out. You guys have a good time. Have a nice visit.
We talk about food a lot.